There's a quiet revolution happening right now, one that doesn't make headlines or trend on social media, but it's changing lives in the most profound way. Think about the last time you truly sat in silence, without the hum of notifications, the chatter of endless tasks, or the weight of expectations pressing in. For most of us, that kind of stillness feels almost foreign, even uncomfortable. But what if I told you that within that silence lies a hidden well of strength? Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." That's the heart of Stoicism, the unshakable belief that tranquility isn't found by drowning out the noise, but by mastering the space between it. Modern life bombards us with distractions, endless scrolling, constant productivity, the pressure to always be on. Yet the ancient Stoics understood something we've forgotten. Silence isn't emptiness. It's the birthplace of resilience, the training ground for presence, and the secret to emotional mastery. Imagine facing chaos, whether it's a stressful job, a personal setback, or just the overwhelm of daily life, and instead of reacting, you respond with unshakable calm. That's not luck, it's a skill forged through deliberate mental shifts, and those shifts, they're available to anyone willing to pause long enough to listen. This video isn't just about quiet moments, it's about the 23 mental frameworks that turn silence into your greatest ally. These are the same principles that guided philosophers, leaders, and everyday people to thrive in adversity, not by fighting the noise, but by cultivating an inner stillness that no external storm can shake. Whether you're seeking focus in a distracted world, resilience in the face of challenges, or simply a deeper connection to your own mind, what follows is a roadmap. So take a breath, let the noise fade for a moment. What you're about to discover isn't just philosophy, it's a way of living that transforms silence from absence into power. Silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. That's the first mental shift, recognizing that stillness isn't a void to avoid but a space to reclaim. The Stoics didn't just tolerate silence, they revered it as a teacher. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, put it plainly, "Be wary of the crowd, it's in solitude that you'll find yourself." He wasn't advocating isolation but intentional pauses, moments where the noise of the world falls away, and you're left with nothing but your own thoughts. Imagine Seneca in 1st century Rome, a city as chaotic as any modern metropolis, carving out hours each evening to reflect, untangle his mind, and strengthen his resolve. He knew what we often forget: silence is where clarity takes root. Now fast forward to today. Think of a CEO facing a high-stakes decision or an artist battling creative block. What do the wisest among them do? They step away, they walk, they sit, they let the whirlwind of demand settle. A tech executive might spend 10 minutes in their car before a meeting, eyes closed, breathing deeply. A writer might start their day not with emails but with a blank page and quiet. These aren't escapes from productivity, they're the foundation of it. Silence sharpens focus, dissolves reactive impulses, and reveals solutions that hustle obscures. So here's a question to sit with. When was the last time you truly let yourself be still? Not scrolling in bed, not half listening to a podcast while you work, but fully immersed in quiet. If the answer feels distant, you're not alone. We've been conditioned to treat silence like an awkward pause in conversation, something to fill immediately. But what if you leaned into it instead? Picture this. Tomorrow morning, before reaching for your phone, you take 5 minutes to just be. No agenda, no distractions. Just you and the space between breaths. That's where the first shift happens, not in grand gestures, but in the courage to stop long enough to hear your own wisdom. Here's a truth that will change how you face every obstacle. Some things are simply not yours to command. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher born into slavery, put it bluntly, some things are within our power while others are not. That single distinction, the dichotomy of control, is the second mental shift that turns everyday frustrations into opportunities for unseen strength. Imagine standing in a downpour, cursing the sky for raining. No amount of anger changes the weather, but your choice to carry an umbrella, that's where your power lies. History offers a striking example in Cato the Younger, a Roman senator who embodied this principle. When Julius Caesar marched on Rome, igniting civil war, Cato fought to preserve the Republic, not because he believed he could single-handedly stop Caesar, but because it was his duty to try. After their defeat, rather than beg for mercy or rage against fate, he chose to take his own life in a final act of defiance. His last words, "I regret that I have but one life to lose for my country." Extreme, perhaps, but his unshakable acceptance of what he couldn't control, Caesar's rise, Rome's fall, freed him to focus on what he could, his own integrity. Now fast forward to your morning commute. Traffic grinds to a halt, and your first instinct is to grip the wheel tighter, muttering about incompetent drivers. But what if instead you took a breath and recognized this truth? The red lights, the construction, the slow-moving truck, none respond to your outrage. But your reaction, that's yours to shape. The same applies to cancelled plans, delayed flights, or a sudden downpour on your day off. Resistance magnifies suffering. Acceptance creates space for creative solutions or even unexpected joys. Consider a musician whose concert gets rained out. They could rant about lost income, or they could live stream an intimate acoustic set from their hotel room, turning disappointment into connection. That's the Stoic shift in action, redirecting energy from what's lost to what's possible. So here's a challenge for you. What's one situation you're wrestling with right now that falls squarely outside your control? A family member's stubborn opinion, a global event that unsettles you, the past. Write it down, then beside it, jot down one thing within your influence. Maybe you can't change their mind, but you can choose curiosity over confrontation. You can't single-handedly solve world hunger, but you can donate or volunteer. This isn't about surrender, it's about strategic focus. The more you practice this mental sorting, dividing the uncontrollable from the actionable, the lighter your burdens become. The irony, acceptance often looks like giving up from the outside, but it's the ultimate act of empowerment. When you stop wasting energy on battles you can't win, you free up reserves for the ones you can. That's how silence becomes strength, not by numbing yourself to life's chaos, but by discerning where your voice and your will actually matter. Marcus Aurelius scribbled a line in his private journal that would echo for centuries: "The obstacle is the way." Not around it, not despite it, but through it. He saw every setback as raw material for growth, the way a blacksmith sees unshaped metal. Picture this: a young merchant named Zeno sailing across the Mediterranean when a storm shatters his ship against the rocks. He washes ashore in Athens with nothing, no cargo, no wealth, no plan. Most would see ruin. Zeno saw a blank slate. Wandering into a bookstore, he discovered Socrates' teachings, then spent years studying with philosophers. That shipwreck didn't end his journey. It rerouted him to found Stoicism itself. Centuries later, his misfortune still shapes minds. Now consider the modern equivalent: a pink slip handed to a mid-level manager after 15 years at the same company. Panic sets in: mortgages, school fees, identity tied to a title. But what if that job loss is the nudge toward launching the bakery they'd always dreamed of? Or the forced pivot into a remote role that finally lets them travel? The Stoics didn't sugarcoat pain, they trained to alchemize it. Like muscles tearing to rebuild stronger, resilience isn't born in comfort. Take the story of a programmer whose app failed spectacularly. Instead of hiding, they documented every glitch in a public post that went viral. Tech CEOs started calling, not for the app, but for their radical transparency. Their biggest flop became their reputation's foundation, or the athlete who blew out a knee days before the Olympics, only to discover a passion for coaching that impacted more lives than any gold medal. Here's the pivot. Adversity doesn't just test character, it forges it. A broken bone heals thicker at the fracture line. Forests need wildfires to clear old growth so new seeds can sprout. Even nature understands destruction and renewal are partners, not opposites. So when your project crumbles or a relationship ends, ask not, why me, but what's being made possible here? The cancelled contract might free you for a better client. The heartbreak could be carving space for a love that aligns deeper. This shift isn't about toxic positivity, it's about strategic perspective. The Stoics didn't deny suffering, they mined it for wisdom. Like sculptors finding form in rough marble, they worked with what life handed them, your current struggle. It might be the exact friction needed to polish you into someone capable of handling what comes next. So next time plans explode, pause, breathe. Then ask, if this isn't an interruption but part of the curriculum, what's it here to teach me? Epictetus stood in a crowded marketplace in ancient Greece, surrounded by the clamor of merchants and travelers, yet he taught his students this. First, say to yourself what you would be, then do what you have to do. That gap between intention and action is where deliberate stillness works its magic. The Stoics didn't wait for quiet moments. They carved them out like sacred appointments with themselves. Picture Epictetus rising before dawn, not to check messages or scroll, but to sit with his thoughts, examining his fears, his desires, his readiness for whatever the day might bring. That ritual wasn't escapism, it was armor. Now fast forward to your average Tuesday. The alarm blares, and within seconds, your thumb taps open emails, social feeds, news alerts, a tidal wave of other people's priorities crashing over you before you've even taken a breath. The ancient Stoics would have seen this as a kind of self-sabotage. Why hand over your first waking thoughts to the chaos of the world when you could claim them for yourself? Imagine two versions of your morning, one where you're reactive, swept into the current of demands before your coffee cools, and another where you gift yourself 5 minutes of pure, uninterrupted stillness. No agenda, no input, just you, a chair, and the quiet hum of your own mind. Here's the experiment. Tomorrow, place your phone in another room before bed. When you wake, don't reach for it. Instead, sit upright, feet on the floor, hands loose in your lap, and count 10 breaths. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 6. That's it. No mantras, no apps, no pressure to clear your mind. If thoughts rush in, and they will, let them pass like clouds. The goal isn't emptiness, it's presence. Those 5 minutes train you to notice the space between stimulus and response where your real power lives. Consider the CEO who starts her day this way. When a crisis erupts by mid-morning, she doesn't spiral, she pauses, she breathes, she responds from that same anchored stillness she practiced at dawn. Or the teacher who sits in his car before class, eyes closed, gathering himself before shaping young minds. These aren't mystical practices, they're practical tools. The Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote his deepest insights not in throne rooms but in the quiet hours before dawn, reminding himself, when you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. So what's at stake if you skip this ritual? Nothing dramatic, just the difference between a life lived by default and one shaped with intention. That frantic morning scroll. It sets your brain to receive mode, priming you to react all day. But stillness, it switches you to create mode. You'll still face traffic jams and deadlines, but with a quiet core that doesn't rattle so easily. The Stoics knew this secret. The battle for a good day isn't won in the office or the inbox, it's won in those first fragile moments after you open your eyes. Try it for 3 days, just 3. Notice how the quality of your attention shifts, how a rude comment rolls off your back, how a setback feels more like a puzzle than a disaster. That's the unseen strength of stillness. It doesn't change the world around you. It changes the world within you, and from that inner shift, everything else follows. Seneca once wrote a letter that could have been addressed to our modern obsession with likes and followers. The applause of the crowd, he warned, is the most fleeting of all things. Imagine him in first-century Rome, watching politicians scramble for public approval, knowing how hollow that pursuit really was. 2,000 years later, nothing's changed. We've just replaced marble forums with glowing screens. The fifth mental shift is this: detaching your worth from external validation and building an unshakable inner compass. The Stoics didn't just ignore praise, they questioned its very value. When a stranger flattered Marcus Aurelius, he'd jot in his journal reminders like, "What's their judgment worth? What's yours?" Consider a famous actor at the peak of their career: red carpets, millions of adoring fans, their face on billboards worldwide. Now picture them backstage after the awards show, alone in a dressing room, staring at their reflection. The applause has faded, the cameras are off. Who are they when no one's watching? That's the question Stoicism forces us to confront. External validation is like salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. Social media metrics, job titles, even personal relationships can't sustainably fill the cup of self-worth. Here's the radical alternative the Stoics practiced: judge yourself by your own standards. Epictetus, born into slavery, had every reason to crave others' approval, yet he taught, if someone told you that others spoke ill of you, would you rush to defend yourself? Then why do you care if they praise you? His point wasn't to reject kindness, but to expose the trap. Tying your identity to opinions you can't control is like building a house on shifting sand. Try this exercise. Make 2 lists. On one, write what strangers or acquaintances think of you, your co-worker's offhand comment, a follower's judgment about your post. On the other, write what you know to be true about your character, your work ethic, your kindness when no one's looking, the promises you've kept to yourself. Which list carries more weight? The gap between them is where freedom lies. History offers a striking contrast. The Roman Emperor Nero, who burned cities for applause, died alone and despised. Meanwhile, Seneca, his advisor who famously walked away from power, left writings that still guide millions. One chased validation, the other cultivated integrity. Your quietest moments, the choices you make when no one's keeping score, that's where real strength is forged. So tonight, before you check those notifications, ask yourself, whose voice in your head is truly yours? And whose are you just borrowing? Marcus Aurelius kept a journal not to record events, but to observe them, like a scientist studying the weather patterns of his own mind. His famous Meditations reads less like an emperor's memoir and more like a series of lab notes. Today I felt anger rise. Why? What story am I telling myself? This is the sixth mental shift, becoming a detached observer of your own experience. The Stoics called it the view from above, imagining yourself floating high enough to see your life as just one thread in a vast tapestry. Picture standing on a hill at dusk, watching 2 ants argue over a crumb. From that height, their conflict seems absurdly small. Now apply that perspective to your last heated text exchange or social media debate. The sting of that comment, the urge to fire back, how much does it matter from 10,000 feet? This technique isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about creating space to choose your response. Think of a surgeon performing an operation on their own child. They'd need to temporarily set aside panic to steady their hands. Similarly, when you observe your thoughts without immediately identifying with them, you gain the clarity to act rather than react. Modern psychology echoes this with mindfulness, but the Stoics were there first. Epictetus taught his students to greet every upsetting thought with, "You are just an impression and not necessarily the truth." Consider a viral Twitter feud between two celebrities. From ground level, it's dramatic insults flying, fans choosing sides, but scroll out. In a week, the algorithm will have moved on. In a year, neither participant will remember the exact words. In a decade, it'll be a footnote in some pop culture retrospective. The heat you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic or dismisses your idea in a meeting, that's real in the moment, but does it deserve to hijack your next hour? Here's how to practice. Next time you're embroiled in conflict, hit pause, close your eyes if you can, and mentally zoom out. See the room you're in from the ceiling. See your city from space. See Earth as a pale blue dot. Whatever agitated you hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has. A CEO who masters this can receive scathing feedback without flinching, extract the useful data, and discard the emotional noise. A parent can watch their toddler's meltdown without mirroring the chaos. Try this tonight. Replay a recent frustration using the view from above. Maybe it was a coworker taking credit for your idea. At ground level, it feels like betrayal. From 10,000 feet, perhaps they're insecure, or maybe it was an oversight. Maybe in 5 years, it won't even be a memory. The goal isn't to dismiss your feelings, but to see them as passing weather, intense in the moment but never permanent. After all, you wouldn't curse the sky for a thunderstorm. You'd wait it out, knowing the clouds will eventually part. Your thoughts deserve the same patience. Loneliness is fear, solitude is power. That's the seventh mental shift, recognizing that being alone isn't a void to escape but a forge for self-discovery. Picture Epicurus in his Athenian garden, surrounded by friends yet carving out hours each day for quiet reflection. His philosophy wasn't about isolation but intentional aloneness, the kind that sharpens your thoughts like a blade on a whetstone. Fast forward to today, where we mistake constant connection for fulfillment, yet feel emptier than ever. The difference: loneliness aches from a lack of others. Solitude thrives from presence with yourself. Modern research backs what the Stoics knew. Solitude fuels creativity. Studies show that people who regularly spend time alone score higher on problem-solving tasks and exhibit greater emotional resilience. Think of Einstein developing relativity during his hours as a patent clerk, or Maya Angelou renting a sparse hotel room to write, stripped of distractions. Their breakthroughs didn't come from committees or crowds, but from the alchemy of quiet minds at work. Even in nature, the most majestic trees don't grow clustered together. They need space to stretch their roots and branches without competition. Yet we've been conditioned to treat solitude like a punishment. Children get time-outs. Adults joke about being left to their own thoughts as if it's torture. But what if you flipped that script? Imagine gifting yourself one uninterrupted hour, no devices, no agendas, just you and the rhythm of your breath. What might surface? A forgotten passion buried under busyness, a solution to a problem you've been chewing on, or maybe just the realization that you're capable of being your own company without rushing to fill the silence. History's most resilient figures mastered this. Nikola Tesla spent years in near isolation, conducting experiments that would electrify the world. Emily Dickinson's seclusion birthed poetry that still resonates. Their strength didn't come from avoiding others, but from knowing when to withdraw and listen to their inner voice. Contrast that with our modern reflex to numb solitude with podcasts, playlists, and endless scrolling, anything to avoid the vulnerability of facing ourselves. Here's the challenge: carve out 60 minutes this week for deliberate solitude. Not a walk with headphones, not a bath while binge watching, just you, a notebook, and the space between your thoughts. Write down what emerges without judgment. Maybe it's discomfort at first, like muscles stretching after years of sitting. But beneath that unease lies something profound, the unshakable realization that you are enough, even when no one's applauding. That's where unseen strength lies, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet corners where you remember who you are when the world isn't looking. Seneca once wrote a letter that should be required reading for anyone clinging to past regrets. No person hands out their money to passers-by, he observed, but how many of us hand out our lives? The irony stings. We guard our wallets fiercely while squandering something far more precious, the present moment. Here's the eighth mental shift: treating the past not as an anchor but as compost, something to learn from, then let decompose into fuel for growth. The Stoics didn't deny their mistakes, they mined them for lessons and moved on. Imagine Seneca at his writing desk, reflecting on years lost to ambition and vanity before finding philosophy. Rather than wallowing, he used those regrets as kindling to ignite a more intentional life. His famous words cut to the core: "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Consider a musician who botched an audition for their dream conservatory. For years, they replay that stumble, the missed note, the judge's frown, letting it define them. Then one day they realize that moment only holds power because they keep resurrecting it. The Stoic remedy: honor the lesson, prepare more next time, but bury the shame. History offers a vivid example in Thomas Edison, who reframed 10,000 failed experiments as finding 10,000 ways that don't work. His laboratory fires weren't tragedies, they were data points. Modern psychology confirms this ancient wisdom. Rumination, the loop of reliving past pain, activates the same neural pathways as the original event, essentially reopening the wound. Meanwhile, studies on post-traumatic growth show that those who reflect on hardships with curiosity, "What did this teach me?" rather than regret, "Why did this happen to me?" recover faster and thrive more fully. Picture two veterans from the same battle, one trapped in "if only" scenarios, the other channeling their experience into mentoring others. Both faced the same fire, only one remained burned. So here's a challenge: pick one old story you've been telling yourself, the missed opportunity, the embarrassment, the betrayal. Write it down, then ask, what wisdom did it leave behind? Maybe that failed business taught you to read contracts more carefully. Maybe the heartbreak revealed your own boundaries. Now take that insight and ceremonially burn the rest. Literally or metaphorically, release what no longer serves you. The Stoics didn't advocate forgetting the past, they advised divorcing it from self-punishment. Think of a farmer planting seeds in spring. They don't waste energy cursing last year's drought, they adjust their irrigation. Your past isn't a life sentence, it's a field report. Every great philosopher, inventor, and artist has a graveyard of failures behind them. What sets them apart isn't a flawless history, but the courage to keep walking forward without dragging the dead. So tonight, as you lie in bed, ask yourself, what am I ready to bury, not to erase, but to fertilize the ground for what's growing next? Epictetus warned his students with brutal clarity. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak. That simple anatomy lesson holds the 9th mental shift, the art of letting silence sharpen your words into tools rather than weapons. Picture a blacksmith's forge. Every strike of the hammer serves a purpose. That's how the Stoics viewed speech, not as idle chatter to fill air, but as deliberate strokes shaping reality. Fast forward to today, where social media feeds overflow with half-formed thoughts, impulsive tweets, and endless self-narration. The average person speaks roughly 20,000 words daily, but how many carry weight? How many are just noise? Consider the modern addiction to oversharing. A study from the University of California found that people will willingly give up money just to talk about themselves. We've confused vulnerability with volume, mistaking constant expression for authenticity. But the Stoics practiced something radical: economy of speech. When Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, spoke, his students leaned in, not because he was theatrical, but because his silence made his words rare and potent. Imagine applying that discipline today. What if your next text, email, or meeting contribution had to pass one filter? Does this improve the silence? History offers a masterclass in this principle. Take the laconic phrase named after Sparta's region of Laconia, where warriors perfected the art of brevity. When Philip of Macedon threatened, "If I enter your lands, I will raze Sparta to the ground," their reply, "If," one word carried more defiance than any rant. Contrast that with today's political speeches bloated with empty rhetoric or corporate meetings drowning in jargon. The power isn't in how much you say, but in how little you need to. Here's the experiment. Try a day of intentional silence, not monastic vows, just conscious restraint. Before speaking, pause, ask, is this necessary? Is it kind? Does it serve? You'll quickly notice how much speech is autopilot, habitual complaints, rehearsed opinions, nervous chatter. But in those gaps, something extraordinary happens. Your presence deepens, people lean in when you do speak, and your words, no longer diluted by excess, start to land with the precision of an arrow. Think of a CEO who only intervenes in meetings to reframe the entire discussion with one question. Or a parent who, instead of lecturing a rebellious teen, lets their silence speak volumes before calmly stating a boundary. Even nature understands this. The most powerful storms often begin with eerie stillness. Your challenge isn't to become mute, but to make silence your ally. Let it strip away the unnecessary until what remains is pure, undiluted meaning. After all, the tighter you coil a spring, the farther it launches. The same is true of your unspoken thoughts. Marcus Aurelius carried an invisible fortress with him, one no army could breach, no disaster could topple. He called it his inner citadel, a mental stronghold where his truest self remained untouched by external storms. Picture a Roman general standing on a battlefield, arrows whistling past, yet his expression never wavers. That's the Stoic ideal, not a numbness to life's blows, but an unshakable core that weathers them. The emperor wrote in his private journals, "You have within you a quiet retreat. Hasten there and you'll find calm." That's the 10th mental shift, building an emotional bunker not to hide from the world, but to engage with it from a place of unbreakable clarity. History offers a gripping example in Admiral James Stockdale, shot down over Vietnam and held as a prisoner of war for 7 years. Tortured, isolated, and starved, he credited Stoicism for his survival. While his body was shackled, his mind retreated to that inner citadel. He later explained, "I never lost the belief that I was ultimately in control of my life." Not of his circumstances, the ropes, the darkness, the interrogations, but of his choices. To resist without hatred, to suffer without surrender. That's the paradox of the citadel. The more fortified your inner world, the freer you become in any outer chaos. Now imagine your own battles, the looming layoff, the crumbling relationship, the health scare that rewrites your future. The details differ, but the challenge remains. Where do you retreat when the walls cave in? For some, it's a morning ritual, 10 minutes of journaling before the day's storms hit. For others, it's a phrase they whisper like a mantra, "This too shall pass." The citadel isn't built from grand gestures but from small, daily reinforcements. A teacher grading papers after a student's cruel remark might pause, breathe, and remember, their words define them, not me. A nurse in a chaotic ER might anchor herself to a single intention: be the calm in this storm. The Stoics weren't naive, they knew suffering was inevitable. But their genius lay in distinguishing between pain, which is real, and despair, which is optional. Think of a tree in a hurricane. Its branches might bend, even break, but its roots hold firm. Your citadel is those roots, your values, your breath, your ability to witness thoughts without being consumed by them. When Marcus Aurelius faced betrayal, he didn't deny his hurt. He simply returned to his center, writing, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." Here's the challenge: identify one daily practice that strengthens your inner walls. Maybe it's noting 3 things within your control each morning, or revisiting a Stoic passage when anger flares. The goal isn't to erase emotion, but to house it in something sturdier than reaction. Because when the world feels like it's burning, as it often does, the quietest strength isn't found in fighting fires, but in knowing you carry your own unburnable refuge. The weight room teaches a truth the Stoics knew centuries ago. Resistance isn't your enemy, it's your coach. Every dumbbell curl, every squat, every drop of sweat is a tiny contract with discomfort, and that contract pays out in strength. Epictetus put it bluntly: difficulties show what men are. He wasn't just talking about philosophers, he was speaking to anyone who's ever faced a setback and discovered they were tougher than they knew. Imagine a sprinter tearing their ACL mid-season. The diagnosis feels like a death sentence until they realize rehab isn't just restoring their knee, it's rebuilding their entire approach to discipline. A year later, they return not just healed but transformed, setting personal records because the injury forced them to train smarter, not just harder. History offers a masterclass in this shift with the story of Wilma Rudolph. Stricken with polio as a child, she wore leg braces for years, told she might never walk normally. Yet those braces became her first weights, her earliest resistance. By 16, she was sprinting. By 20, she'd won 3 Olympic gold medals. The obstacles didn't disappear, they became her curriculum. The Stoics would have recognized her journey immediately. Seneca wrote, "Fate leads the willing and drags the unwilling." Rudolph didn't just accept her fate, she partnered with it, turning every limitation into leverage. Now zoom into your own life. That project that failed, it taught you to vet ideas more carefully. The friendship that ended, it revealed your non-negotiables. Even the traffic jam that made you late last week, what if it wasn't just an annoyance, but a drill in patience? The cashier who snapped at you could have been a pop quiz in empathy. When you start viewing life's friction as purposeful training, setbacks lose their sting. They're not punishments, they're personalized workouts for your resilience. Consider how muscles grow. Fibers tear under stress, then heal stronger. Your character develops the same way. A study at the University of Buffalo tracked people who'd faced moderate adversity, job losses, rejections, injuries, and found they handled future stress better than those who'd experienced either no hardship or extreme trauma. The sweet spot, enough resistance to stretch you, not break you. That's the Stoic sweet spot too. Marcus Aurelius thanked his harsh tutors in his journals, crediting them for his thick skin. Without those early struggles, he might have remained soft, unprepared for the burdens of empire. So here's the reframe: next time you hit a wall, ask not, "Why is this happening to me?" but "What is this preparing me for?" The argument with your partner might be training you in communication. The creative block could be forcing you to dig deeper. Even the burnt toast morning isn't just bad luck. It's a microdose of adaptability. The more you lean into this mindset, the more life starts to feel like a grand gymnasium, every challenge calibrated to reveal strength you didn't know you had. Think back to one difficulty you once resented but now appreciate. Maybe it was the professor who graded you harshly, sharpening your skills, the layoff that pushed you toward a better path, the heartbreak that taught you self-worth. Gratitude for those trials doesn't mean you enjoyed them in the moment. It means you recognize their role in forging you. That's the ultimate shift, seeing the obstacle course of life not as a gauntlet to survive, but as the very thing sculpting you into someone who doesn't need to fear the next one. Seneca once described anger as brief insanity, a fire that burns brightest in those first uncontrolled seconds. Picture this: a driver cuts you off, your grip tightens on the wheel, heat floods your chest, and in that flash, you're one choice away from laying on the horn or taking a breath so deep it resets your pulse. That split second is where Stoic strength hides. The 12th mental shift isn't about suppressing reactions. It's about inserting a deliberate pause between trigger and response, like a safety switch on your emotions. Seneca practiced this daily. When insulted, he'd walk away, not out of weakness, but to let the initial sting fade before deciding if a reply even deserved his energy. The greatest remedy for anger, he wrote, is delay. Modern neuroscience confirms this ancient wisdom. Studies at the University of Michigan found that the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, takes just milliseconds to flare, while the prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational thought, lags behind by 10 to 12 seconds. That gap is your Stoic pause. Imagine a CEO reading a scathing email from a client. Their first draft reply drips with defensiveness, but if they close their laptop, walk around the block, and return suddenly, the response is measured, strategic, even empathetic. The situation didn't change, their access to their own wisdom did. Apply this to your most charged moments. The text thread where someone twists your words, what shifts if you step outside for 5 minutes instead of firing back? The meeting where a colleague dismisses your idea. How might your influence grow if you pause to ask clarifying questions rather than reacting to the tone? Even in traffic, that paused breath transforms rage into perspective. Maybe the speeding driver is rushing to a hospital, or maybe they're just careless, but why let their behavior dictate yours? History offers a striking contrast in the Roman Emperor Augustus. When a senator publicly humiliated him, Augustus didn't exile or execute the man, he invited him to dinner. By morning, the critic had become an ally. That pause, that refusal to meet provocation with equal force, turned an enemy into a supporter. Compare that to modern Twitter feuds where careers crumble over tweets sent in seconds and regretted for years. Here's the experiment for one day: institute a 10-second rule. Before any emotional response, whether it's a snarky comment, a defensive email, or even an internal judgment, count slowly to 10. Notice how the urge to react often shrinks on its own, like a wave pulling back from shore. The Stoics knew this secret. Time doesn't just heal wounds, it reveals which battles are worth fighting. Your greatest power isn't in your quickest comeback. It's in the space between what you feel and what you choose to do next. The Stoics had a counterintuitive practice that at first sounds like pessimism until you realize it's the ultimate hack for contentment. They called it premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Picture this: each morning before stepping into the chaos of ancient Rome, Seneca would mentally rehearse losing his wealth, his status, even his loved ones. Not to dwell in dread, but to peel away the illusion that these things were guaranteed. By imagining their absence, he sharpened his appreciation for their presence. It's like pressing your hand against a cold window when you pull away. The warmth you took for granted suddenly feels miraculous. Fast forward to your average Tuesday. The Wi-Fi cuts out during a work call, and for a split second, panic sets in. Deadlines loom, emails stall, but then something shifts. You notice sunlight through the window. The hum of the fridge, the fact that you have food in it, that outage, however brief, becomes a masterclass in how much you rely on invisible systems. The Stoics would nod in recognition. They weren't advocating living in fear. They were training the mind to recognize abundance by periodically subtracting it. History offers a poignant example in the journals of Marcus Aurelius. As emperor, he ruled one of history's most powerful empires, yet he wrote nightly of his own mortality, picturing the throne empty, his name forgotten. Far from depressing him, this practice fueled his urgency to govern justly. He knew power was loaned, not owned. Modern psychology backs this. Studies show people who regularly reflect on life's fragility report higher baseline happiness. It's not about expecting disaster, but dismantling the assumption that comforts are permanent. So here's the challenge. Pick one ordinary blessing, your morning coffee, the ability to walk, a friend's laugh, and spend 60 seconds truly imagining life without it. Not as a morbid exercise, but as a lens to refocus your gratitude. That rush of appreciation, that's the Stoic secret. The things we miss most aren't the grand achievements, but the tiny gears of daily life we never notice until they squeak. Your phone isn't just a device, it's a portal to human knowledge. Your bed isn't just furniture, it's a sanctuary of rest. Even your toughest days assume 1,000 invisible gifts: oxygen in your lungs, gravity keeping you grounded, synapses firing thoughts you take for granted as you. Now ask yourself, what if today's inconveniences, the delayed train, the slow internet, the burnt toast, were the best-case scenario? Because somewhere, someone is wishing for exactly your worst day. That's the power of negative visualization. It doesn't just breed gratitude, it reveals how much you already hold. Epictetus drilled this truth into his students 2,000 years ago. What's up to you? Your effort, never the outcome. Imagine a gladiator stepping into the Colosseum, muscles taut, sword in hand. He can train for years, study his opponent's moves, and fight flawlessly, but the crowd's thumbs. The emperor's whim, those lie beyond his control. The Stoic warrior knew victory wasn't promised, but excellence was always within reach. Fast forward to today's job market. You tailor resumes, rehearse interviews, network tirelessly. Yet the hiring manager's biases, budget cuts, or sheer luck remain wild cards. The modern gladiator doesn't battle lions but uncertainty, and the same Stoic shift applies. Focus on your swing, not where the arrow lands. Consider two job candidates. One obsesses over every rejection, dissecting phantom flaws. The other tracks a different metric: hours spent refining skills, outreach emails sent, interviews learned from. Who grows stronger? Studies on resilience show it's the second. Psychologists call this process orientation, but the Stoics framed it more viscerally. Life is an archery contest. You can perfect your stance, draw, and release, but once the arrow flies, wind takes over. Bemoaning a gust is as futile as a farmer cursing rain. Yet we do it constantly, fixating on grades instead of learning, likes instead of creating, promotions instead of mastery. History offers a masterclass in this shift through the story of Thomas Edison's lesser-known rival, Nikola Tesla. While Edison chased patents and profits, Tesla often worked through the night purely for the thrill of solving puzzles. Many of his breakthroughs never earned him a dime, yet he died fulfilled, whispering, "I have lived my life as I intended." Contrast that with modern burnout culture, where self-worth ties to metrics, followers gained, bonuses secured, as fleeting as applause in an empty theater. The Stoic alternative: measure yourself by your own standards. Did you show up fully? Did you push your limits? That's where true pride lies. Here's the experiment. For 1 week, keep an effort journal. Each evening, note 3 actions you took toward a goal: studying a new skill, having a tough conversation, even resisting unhealthy impulses. Not the results, just the attempts. You'll notice something radical. Outcomes fluctuate, but effort compounds. A writer rejected by 20 publishers isn't 20 times worse off. If they kept writing, they're 20 times sharper. A salesperson hearing no 99 times isn't failing. They're one call closer to someone ready to say yes. So ask yourself, when did you last praise yourself for trying, regardless of the scoreboard? Not for landing the client, but for preparing thoroughly. Not for the flawless speech, but for practicing despite fear. The gladiator's real triumph wasn't surviving the arena, it was entering it. Your courage to keep showing up, even when the crowd's silent, that's the unseen victory Stoics revered. And unlike trophies gathering dust, that kind of strength only deepens with time. Marcus Aurelius stared at the rushing Tiber River and saw more than water. He saw a mirror of life itself. Time is a river, he wrote, and its current strong. No sooner is a thing brought to sight than it is swept by. That observation holds the 15th mental shift, embracing impermanence not as loss, but as the very pulse of existence. Picture an ancient oak in your backyard. Its leaves don't cling when autumn comes, they release in a blaze of color, knowing their fall makes space for spring's rebirth. Now look at your smartphone, the model you waited in line for 5 years ago, already obsolete, the app that dominated headlines last year, today's afterthought. This isn't failure, it's the rhythm of reality. The tech industry understands this dance better than most. Blockbuster laughed when Netflix offered to sell for $50 million. Kodak invented the digital camera, then shelved it to protect film sales. Both are now case studies in resisting change. Contrast that with Adobe, which disrupted its own cash cow by shifting from packaged software to cloud subscriptions. Their stock price initially plummeted. Today, they're industry leaders. The Stoic lesson here isn't just about business, it's about the freedom found in loosening your grip. The Japanese practice of kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, captures this perfectly. Breakage isn't the end, it's the beginning of a new kind of beauty. Consider your own life, that career path you mapped at 20, the relationship you thought would last forever, the version of yourself you've outgrown but still cling to. Aging offers the clearest example. Wrinkles appear not because time is cruel, but because living leaves marks. A study from Harvard's Happiness Lab found that people who accept aging as natural report higher life satisfaction than those fighting it with endless creams and denial. The same applies to ideas. The beliefs that served you at 30 might suffocate you at 40 if you refuse to let them evolve. Here's the practice. Pick one area where you're resisting change. Maybe it's a fading friendship, a shifting industry trend, or even your own body's natural transitions. Write it down, then ask, what becomes possible when I stop fighting this? A musician who loses hearing might discover composing. A parent whose kids leave home might rediscover neglected passions. Even glaciers, when they melt, feed rivers that nourish continents. Nothing truly disappears, it transforms. The Stoics weren't passive about change, they were proactive students of it. They trained daily to separate what decays: bodies, reputations, material things from what endures: character, wisdom, actions aligned with virtue. When Marcus Aurelius meditated on his own death, he wasn't courting morbidity, he was sharpening his appreciation for the present. Your phone will break. Your job will evolve, your hair will gray, but your capacity to meet each shift with grace, that's the unshakable core no tide can erode. So tonight, as you watch the sunset, notice how its fleeting nature doesn't diminish its brilliance but intensifies it. That's the gift of impermanence. It teaches us to stop waiting for someday and start seeing the art in the ephemeral. Envy is a compass pointing toward what we admire, but only if we know how to read it. Seneca saw jealousy not as a sin but as a signal, writing, "The man who envies others is the man who has not yet understood his own gifts." That's the 16th mental shift, transforming envy from a poison into a roadmap. Picture two co-workers at a promotion party. One seethes inwardly, tallying their colleagues' advantages, the right connections, the lucky breaks. The other leans in, curious. What habits got them here? What can I learn? Both feel the same initial sting. Only one lets it catalyze growth. History offers a masterclass in this through Michelangelo's rivalry with Leonardo da Vinci. When critics hailed Leonardo's sketches as superior, Michelangelo didn't sulk. He locked himself in his studio for months, emerging with techniques that would redefine Renaissance art. The Stoics would have recognized his response. They practiced prosoph, a relentless focus on self-improvement by studying exemplars, not to copy them, but to extract principles that could elevate their own unique path. Imagine applying this to social media today. Instead of scrolling through a friend's vacation photos with clenched teeth, you might note, "Their discipline to save for travel inspires me to audit my spending." Now contrast that with our modern comparison traps. Algorithms feed us highlight reels while we're knee-deep in our own behind-the-scenes struggles. A study from UCLA found that passive social media browsing spikes cortisol levels, the stress hormone, while active engagement, commenting, learning has no such effect. The difference: one fosters helpless observation, the other purposeful emulation. Think of a musician who admires a virtuoso's skill. They could lament their own lack of talent, or they could dissect the artist's practice routines, the pre-dawn rehearsals, the deliberate drills, and adapt one element to their own regimen. Here's the litmus test. When you encounter someone's success, does it make you feel smaller or sharper? The ancient Athenians built statues not to worship heroes but to remind citizens of potential. Your envy, stripped of bitterness, holds that same power. So tonight, pick one person whose achievements stir that familiar ache. Write down 3 traits or habits that got them there, not genetics or luck, but choices within your influence. Then choose one to trial for 30 days. The goal isn't to become them, but to borrow their ladder until you can build your own. Seneca put it best: we are all fragments of each other's possibilities. What if every pang of jealousy was just your soul pointing toward a latent strength waiting to be unlocked? The teacher you admire for their patience, the entrepreneur whose resilience thrills you, even the stranger on the subway reading a book you wish you'd written, they're not rivals. They're mirrors reflecting back the next version of yourself. Diogenes lounged in his barrel under the Athenian sun, watching Alexander the Great approach with amusement. When the conqueror offered him anything in the world, the philosopher simply replied, "Step aside, you're blocking my light." That moment captures the 17th mental shift. True wealth isn't about accumulating more, but discovering how little you actually need. The Stoics called this ascesis, the practice of voluntary discomfort to reveal the difference between necessities and distractions. Picture a modern executive trading their penthouse for a tiny house, or a college student realizing their happiest semesters were spent with just a backpack and a library card. Minimalism isn't new. It's ancient wisdom repackaged for an age drowning in stuff. History brims with examples of strength born from simplicity. Teddy Roosevelt, sickly as a child, rebuilt his body through brutal wilderness expeditions, sleeping on frozen ground, enduring blizzards with minimal gear. The discomfort didn't break him. It distilled him into one of America's most robust leaders. Fast forward to Navy SEAL training, where recruits spend days wet, sandy, and exhausted to prove their minds can override their cravings for comfort. The Stoics would nod in recognition. Seneca, despite his wealth, regularly ate stale bread and slept on hard floors, writing, "Set aside a certain number of days to be content with the scantiest food, the cheapest clothing, then you'll understand that happiness costs far less than you imagined." Now look at your own life. That closet stuffed with unworn clothes, the subscriptions draining your account for services you barely use, even the mental clutter of endless to-dos. What's their true cost? Not just in dollars, but in attention, in decision fatigue, in the quiet dread of maintenance they demand. A Stanford study found that people who cleaned their physical workspace could solve creative problems 30% faster. Clarity thrives in empty space. Here's the experiment. Pick one area, your phone apps, your kitchen pantry, even your calendar, and strip it down to only what serves you. Not to austerity's extreme, but to the point where each remaining item feels intentional. When author Cal Newport deleted social media, he didn't just regain hours, he rediscovered depth in his work and relationships. Voluntary discomfort works the same way fasting does, not to punish the body, but to reset its hunger signals. That ache you feel when you consider giving up your third streaming service. That's not loss, it's the sound of your mind relearning what real nourishment feels like. So tonight, as you walk through your home, ask, what here is truly mine and what owns me? The answer might surprise you, because freedom, as Diogenes proved, often looks like having nothing left to lose and everything left to see. A customer service rep stares at their screen, reading an all-caps email accusing them of incompetence. Their pulse jumps, fingers hover over the keyboard. This is the decisive moment Epictetus described when he said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." That sliver of time between trigger and action is where the 18th mental shift lies, the choice to respond rather than react. Picture a martial artist deflecting a punch, not by meeting force with force, but by redirecting energy with precision. The insult still lands, the frustration still flares, but the disciplined mind treats them as raw material to shape rather than orders to obey. Consider the difference between two airline passengers whose flights get cancelled. One storms to the counter, berating the gate agent about ruined plans. The other takes a breath, then asks calmly, "What's the next available option?" Both face the same inconvenience, only one emerges with their dignity and often a better outcome. Neuroscience reveals why this works. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system, fires in milliseconds, but the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoned decisions, takes 12 seconds to engage. Those 12 seconds are your Stoic training ground. Seneca practiced this by delaying all responses to provocations, writing, "The best cure for anger is to let it cool." He wasn't suppressing emotion, he was creating space to act from wisdom rather than reflex. History offers a masterclass in this through Abraham Lincoln's hot letters. When furious with a general's incompetence during the Civil War, he'd draft scathing reprimands, then file them unsent. The act of writing channeled his rage. The pause ensured he governed rather than vented. Contrast that with modern Twitter feuds where careers implode over tweets fired off in seconds. The Stoic alternative: treat every emotional surge like a text message, write it out, then sleep on it before hitting send. Here's the challenge for one day: institute a 10-second rule. Before answering a snippy email, before snapping at a slow cashier, even before indulging in self-criticism after a mistake, pause. Count 10 breaths. Inhale for 4, hold for 4, exhale for 6. Notice how often the urge to react shrinks on its own, like a wave receding from shore. A nurse in a chaotic ER might use this gap to choose compassion over irritation with a demanding patient. A parent might see their child's tantrum not as defiance but as unmet need. Even in traffic, that pause transforms honking into noticing the sunset. Epictetus, born into slavery, had every reason to lash out at life's unfairness. Yet he taught, we cannot choose our external circumstances, but we can always choose how we respond to them. Your boss's criticism still stings, but now you ask clarifying questions instead of defensive justifications. The rude comment on your post still prickles, but you scroll past rather than ignite a futile debate. Reaction is the knee-jerk, response is the mindful step forward. So tonight, replay one moment today where instinct took the wheel. How might it have unfolded if you'd pressed pause? That's where unseen strength hides, not in avoiding life's sparks, but in choosing whether to fan them or let them fade. Marcus Aurelius began each dawn with a reminder that would unsettle most modern minds. When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly. This wasn't cynicism, it was radical empathy in disguise. The 19th mental shift flips the script on frustration by revealing every difficult person as both a mirror and a mentor. Picture this, you're stuck in a subway car at rush hour, shoulder to shoulder with strangers radiating exhaustion. Someone shoves past without apology, their elbow jabbing your ribs. Your jaw clenches until you notice the hospital badge pinned to their bag, the shadows under their eyes. Suddenly, their rudeness transforms from personal affront to human frailty. That's the cosmic perspective in action. Recognizing that the behaviors triggering us are rarely about us at all. The Stoics called this sympatheia, the interconnectedness of all beings through shared, imperfect humanity. When Marcus wrote about anticipating others' flaws, he wasn't excusing harm, he was vaccinating himself against resentment. Think of a waiter snapping at your table after a long shift. The impatient driver tailgating you might be racing to a sick child's bedside. Even the co-worker who undermines your ideas could be clinging to job security after past failures. This isn't about justifying poor behavior, but about seeing through it to the universal tremors of fear, exhaustion, or unmet needs that drive us all. History offers a profound example in Abraham Lincoln's leadership during the Civil War. Faced with generals who disobeyed orders and politicians who betrayed him, he famously said, "I don't like that man. I must get to know him better." His private letters reveal a man who channeled Stoic discipline to separate others' actions from their humanity. Where others saw enemies, Lincoln saw frightened men, some fighting to preserve slavery, yes, but others simply terrified of economic ruin or social chaos. That clarity allowed him to negotiate rather than vilify. Now apply this to your daily friction points. The neighbor who blasts music at midnight, what if their insomnia stems from grief? The relative who always debates politics at holidays, might their rigid views mask deep insecurity? Even online trolls spewing venom from behind screens often reveal more about their isolation than your worth. A Stanford study found that when people humanized those they disagreed with, imagining their childhoods, their struggles, their capacity for productive dialogue doubled. Here's the practice. Next time someone tests your patience, pause and mentally draft their backstory, not to excuse harm, but to disarm your own reactivity. The barrister who messes up your order could be a single parent working 3 jobs. The dismissive comment on your post might come from someone drowning in self-doubt. This shift doesn't demand forgiveness, just perspective. As Epictetus put it, every insult is like a gift. If you refuse to accept it, it remains with the giver. So tonight, reflect. Who grated on you today? What might their behavior whisper about the burdens we all carry? that crowded elevator, that contentious meeting, they're not just annoyances. They're living lessons in the art of separating the deed from the doer. And in that space between action and judgment lies an unexpected kind of strength, the power to remain unshaken because you finally see the shakiness in us all. Seneca wrote a letter to his friend Lucilius that contained a chilling line. Let us prepare our minds as if we'd come to the very end of life. Let us postpone nothing. He wasn't being morbid, he was handing us the 20th mental shift, a Stoic practice called memento mori, the art of keeping death close to sharpen life's brilliance. Picture this, you're crossing the street when a speeding car misses you by inches. For one breathless moment, time stops, the colors around you deepen. The air tastes sweeter, that stranger's smile suddenly feels precious. This isn't just adrenaline, it's clarity cutting through life's fog. The Stoics engineered that same awakening through daily ritual, not by courting danger, but by confronting mortality's inevitability to amplify living. Take the story of a businessman whose heart stopped mid-flight. Revived by a doctor on board, he described the experience not as terror, but as a crystal-clear lens snapping into focus. Within a year, he'd left his unfulfilling job, repaired broken relationships, and started teaching underprivileged kids to code, all things he'd someday planned to do. The Stoics would have recognized his transformation instantly. Marcus Aurelius meditated on death each morning, not to depress himself, but to distill his priorities. You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think. Now contrast that with how most of us operate, postponing joy for hypothetical futures. We'll take that dream trip after retirement, reconcile with that estranged sibling when tensions ease, write that novel once we have more time. But what if more time is the illusion? A hospital chaplain once noted that no one on their deathbed regrets not working more hours. They grieve the books unread, the loves unexpressed, the adventures deferred. The French call this l'appel du vide, the call of the void, that sudden awareness of life's fragility when standing on a cliff's edge. The Stoics didn't wait for cliffs, they cultivated that awareness as daily practice. Here's how to try it. Tonight, as you turn off the light, ask yourself two questions. First, did I live fully today? Not perfectly, not productively, fully. Did I taste my food, notice the sky, connect, really connect with someone? Second, if this were my last night, what would I want to remember? Not your job title or bank balance, but the way your child's hand feels in yours, the warmth of sunlight through a cafe window, the plot twist in that novel you're savoring. This isn't about dramatic life overhauls, it's about micro shifts. The email can wait 5 minutes while you watch the sparrows bicker on your fire escape. That difficult conversation might be worth having now rather than when the time is right. History's most vibrant figures understood this. Steve Jobs famously asked himself each morning if that day would be worth repeating on his deathbed. If not, he adjusted course. The Japanese samurai polished their swords each evening as if tomorrow's battle might be their last, not out of fear, but to ensure today's tea was sipped with reverence. Even modern hospice workers report patients experiencing remarkable clarity in their final days, not because dying enlightens, but because it removes life's trivial distractions. The paradox, embracing mortality doesn't shrink your world, it expands it. That last day exercise reveals how much you've been taking for granted. The miracle of your lungs drawing breath, the privilege of choosing how to spend your hours, the ordinary moments that suddenly glow when viewed through the lens of impermanence. So here's the invitation, live today as if you'll die tonight, not with recklessness but with fierce, tender presence, because someday that car won't miss you. That heart won't restart, and when that day comes, let it find you not with a list of postponed joys, but with a life already drunk deeply down to the dregs. Marcus Aurelius left us a secret weapon against chaotic days, one he wielded before the sun rose. When you arise in the morning, he wrote, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. That simple dawn ritual wasn't just poetic, it was psychological armor. Picture this, the Emperor of Rome, ruler of an empire spanning 3 continents, starting his day not with demands or decrees, but with a whispered reminder of his own mortality and gratitude for the chance to serve. Fast forward to your average Monday. The alarm shrieks, your hand fumbles for the phone, and before your eyes fully focus, you're drowning in emails, news alerts, and the gravitational pull of other people's priorities. The Stoics would call this self-sabotage. That first hour isn't just another slot in your schedule, it's the lever that moves your entire day. Consider 2 versions of you. One wakes to a barrage of notifications, immediately surrendering their freshest mental energy to the world's agenda. The other sits upright, feet on the floor, phone untouched, and spends 60 seconds absorbing 3 truths. I am here. This day is finite. What I do with it matters. Neuroscience backs the Stoics here. The brain's prefrontal cortex, responsible for decision-making and emotional regulation, is most receptive in the first 90 minutes after waking. Flood it with inputs and you prime yourself for reactivity. Steep it in intention and you build a foundation for clarity. The contrast plays out in history's most resilient figures. Benjamin Franklin famously asked himself each morning, "What good shall I do this day?" Beethoven counted out exactly 60 coffee beans for his dawn brew, turning ritual into creative fuel. These weren't eccentric habits, they were deliberate acts of ownership over the day's first fragile moments. Meanwhile, studies on smartphone use within 15 minutes of waking show a 23% increase in stress hormones by mid-morning. Your thumbs scrolling through overnight drama or work crises aren't just killing time, they're wiring your nervous system for defensiveness before you've brushed your teeth. Here's the experiment. Tomorrow, place your charger across the room. When the alarm sounds, rise literally before reaching for the screen. Step outside if you can, even for 30 seconds. Feel the air, notice the quality of light. Name one concrete thing you're grateful for, not abstract, health or family, but the specific, the smell of rain on pavement, the way your coffee cup warms your palms, the fact that your knees bent without pain when you stood. This isn't woo-woo positivity, it's tactical. Gratitude journaling has been shown to reduce cortisol levels by 28%. Marcus Aurelius didn't know modern biochemistry, but he knew this: how you start reverberates through how you finish. The Stoic morning isn't about adding another task to your to-do list. It's about subtraction, peeling away the distractions that hijack your attention before you've had a chance to direct it. Think of a musician tuning their instrument before a concert. That silent, focused calibration isn't separate from the performance. It makes the performance possible. Your dawn ritual is no different. That meeting that usually derails you, entered after 5 minutes of centering, it becomes a discussion you steer rather than survive. The traffic jam that typically ruins your mood, met with a breath instead of a curse. It's just weather passing through. So tonight, as you set your alarm, ask yourself, who do I want to be in those first sacred minutes? A passive recipient of the world's noise, or an architect of my own mindset? Because the truth is this: you don't find time for stillness. You steal it back from the chaos, one conscious breath at a time. And in that daily act of rebellion against hurry, against distraction, against the tyranny of immediacy, you reclaim something the Stoics knew was priceless: sovereignty over your own mind. Friedrich Nietzsche borrowed a Stoic superpower when he wrote, "Amor fati, love your fate. Not tolerate it, not endure it, but embrace it with the fierce devotion of a poet kissing their muse." Picture a novelist whose manuscript gets rejected by every major publisher, only to self-publish and accidentally spark a genre revolution. Or a teacher forced online during a pandemic, discovering their gift for reaching global students through a screen. The 22nd mental shift isn't about passive resignation, it's about recognizing that life's detours often lead to vistas we couldn't have plotted on any map. Take the story of a corporate lawyer who developed chronic migraines, ending their 60-hour workweeks. Bedridden for months, they started blogging legal insights in 10-minute bursts between pain flares. Today, that blog is a top-ranked podcast for aspiring lawyers, with sponsorships dwarfing their old salary. The migraines didn't disappear, they became the unlikely compass pointing toward a life that fit better. The Stoics would have nodded knowingly. Epictetus, who turned the agony of a lame leg into philosophical fuel, taught, "Every difficulty carries the seed of an equal or greater benefit." Not as empty consolation, but as empirical fact, constraints breed creativity the way fire shapes diamonds. Now zoom out to your own life. That layoff that felt like failure, could it be the nudge toward work that truly ignites you? The relationship that crumbled, leaving space for someone who aligns deeper? Even the traffic jam that made you late might have spared you from walking into an awkward confrontation. Amor fati flips the script from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "What's this making possible?" Consider how nature operates. Forest fires seem catastrophic, yet certain seeds only sprout in scorched soil. Pearls form when oysters coat irritants with layers of luminous nacre. Your current frustration, that twist you're fighting, what if it's not an obstacle but the raw material for your next evolution? The entrepreneur whose product flopped gained priceless market insights. The athlete whose injury ended their career discovered coaching talents that impacted more lives than any trophy could. Here's the litmus test. What's one curveball you've been resisting that might hold a hidden curriculum? The delayed flight becomes forced reflection time. The noisy neighbor trains your focus. Even grief, that heaviest of teachers, carves reservoirs of compassion in us that joy never could. Nietzsche didn't just borrow this idea from the Stoics, he lived it. Plagued by illness and isolation, he wrote his most revolutionary works in bursts between vomiting and blindness. Later, he'd call those years his great health, not because he felt good, but because suffering honed his thinking like a whetstone sharpens steel. So tonight, as you replay the day's frustrations, try this reframe. What if nothing is happening to you but for you? Not as cosmic pampering, but as the universe's rigorous apprenticeship. The missed connection, the botched presentation, the dream that dissolved. Each is a thread in a tapestry you can't yet see. Amor fati doesn't demand gratitude for pain, but trust in the process. After all, no sailor learns navigation on calm seas. Your storm isn't an interruption of the journey, it's the very thing teaching you to sail. Seneca sat in his dimly lit study, penning words that would outlive Rome itself. All time is lost which we do not pass in honor or good deeds. That line holds the 23rd mental shift, the realization that true strength isn't measured in followers or fortune, but in the silent imprints we leave on souls. Picture two tombstones in a forgotten cemetery. One reads, "Here lies a viral sensation." The other, "Here lies the teacher who taught me to read," which carries more weight when the algorithms fade. History doesn't remember the loudest voices, it preserves the deepest echoes. Consider the difference between a wildfire and an oak tree. The wildfire blazes across headlines, consuming attention with its heat and noise, then vanishes, leaving only ash. The oak grows slowly, unnoticed, its roots stabilizing the soil, its branches sheltering generations of birds. Your social media post might rack up 1 million views this week, but the note you scribbled to a struggling coworker, that could alter the trajectory of their life. A study from Harvard's Happiness Lab tracked 80 years of data and found one consistent predictor of fulfillment: meaningful relationships. Not likes, not retweets, but the quiet moments where one human truly sees another. Now meet Mrs. Henderson, a 5th grade teacher in rural Ohio. She never trended on Twitter or built a personal brand. But 30 years after her retirement, her former students, now doctors, mechanics, artists, still gather annually to honor the woman who taught them to love learning. One credits her for spotting his dyslexia. Another recalls how she packed extra sandwiches for kids with empty lunchboxes. These aren't grand gestures, they're the ordinary acts that become extraordinary in memory's rearview mirror. The Stoics would have recognized Mrs. Henderson's legacy. Seneca wrote, "Wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness. Not spectacle, not self-promotion, just the disciplined choice to leave each interaction slightly better than you found it." Contrast that with today's cult of visibility, where influence is measured in metrics rather than metamorphoses. A YouTuber's apology video might garner more clicks than a scientist's lifetime of research. But click counts expire. The teacher who stays late to help a student grasp algebra, the nurse whose gentle tone eases a terrified patient, the parent who models patience during tantrums. These are the architects of unseen strength, building cathedrals of character one brick at a time. Here's the final question, the one that outlasts this video. What silent strength will you leave behind? Not the stuff that glitters on screens, but the gold that lingers in hearts. Maybe it's the way you listen without interrupting, or the jokes that ease tense rooms. Maybe it's the courage to admit when you're wrong, or the habit of leaving every space cleaner than you entered it. Legacy isn't about etching your name in stone. It's about etching your values into the people who carry them forward. So tonight, as you power down your devices and step into the quiet, ask yourself, when the dust of my days settles, what will remain in the stillness? The answer to that question is the truest measure of a life well lived. So we circle back to where we began, not with a roar, but with a whisper. These 23 mental shifts aren't about grand gestures or overnight transformations. They're the quiet work of rearranging your inner world so that no outer storm can topple you. Think of a tree growing in the cracks of a sidewalk. It doesn't fight the concrete. It finds strength in the spaces between. That's Stoic power, the kind that doesn't need applause because it knows its own depth. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who ruled an empire, found his greatest battles weren't on battlefields but in the pre-dawn silence of his own mind. His words still echo, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Consider the paradox, silence isn't empty." It's where clarity takes root, where reactions become responses, where envy transforms into inspiration. A musician doesn't master scales during the concert, but in lonely hours of practice. A warrior doesn't forge resilience in the clash of swords, but in the discipline of daily drills. Your silent moments, the pause before replying to a provocation, the deep breath before a difficult task, the stillness before sleep, those are your training grounds. Now here's the invitation. Don't try to swallow all 23 shifts at once. Pick just one, the one that hummed in your chest as you listened. Maybe it's the morning ritual of grounding yourself before the world crashes in. Maybe it's the practice of seeing obstacles as raw material for growth. Or perhaps it's the radical act of loving your fate, even when it looks nothing like the map you drew. Fold that single shift into your week like a secret, test it, Tweak it, let it surprise you, and when the noise of life returns, as it always does, you'll carry this quiet knowing. Strength isn't measured in decibels. It's the unshakable calm of a mind that's learned to sit with silence long enough to hear its own wisdom. So tell me, which shift will you take with you? Drop it in the comments, not for likes, but as a pact with yourself, because the world needs more people who have turned their quiet into something unbreakable. And that starts with you.